All right, so welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today, we're going to be looking at some pretty interesting news coming out of Voice of America's Korean language news program.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and specifically, we're going to be diving into how the FBI is trying to tackle North Korea's sanctions evasion. And you ready for this? It involves cryptocurrency.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's a really interesting kind of intersection of global politics, law enforcement, and technology, especially in today's digital age.
Right, it's crazy. And actually, according to this VOA report, the FBI's list of wanted North Korean sanctions violators has more than doubled.
Hmm. That's pretty significant. I think that points to a couple of things. It kind of suggests that North Korea is upping their game in terms of sanctions evasion. It's getting more sophisticated. And it also probably suggests a more proactive, maybe even aggressive response from the FBI to try and counter those activities.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And this is where things get really interesting to me. The report also mentioned that North Korea has stolen an insane amount of cryptocurrency. Like, we're talking about $800 million worth.
Wow.
That's 35% of global cryptocurrency losses.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, those figures are really staggering. And I think it really illustrates why cryptocurrency is such a tempting target for, those seeking to get around these sanctions.
Right.
Think about it. Cryptocurrency operates outside those traditional financial systems, the ones that are governed by banks and governments.
Mm-hmm.
So, that decentralized nature, it makes it way harder to trace those transactions. And if you go the right tools, you can actually get a good bit of anonymity. So it's attractive for illicit activities, including evading sanctions.
It's like this big game of hide and seek, but with like really high stakes and huge financial rewards if you can actually exploit the system successfully.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
And speaking of, people getting caught up in this, the report also mentioned this American woman who actually just pled guilty to helping North Korean IT workers get jobs, like fraudulently.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect example of how these schemes often work. These sanctions evasion schemes, you have these complex networks, and sometimes you have people who don't even realize that they're supporting these illicit activities. It really raises some important questions about how to raise awareness and how to prevent people from getting involved in stuff like that without knowing what they're doing.
Yeah, it's really a good reminder that even stuff that seems totally legitimate can be manipulated for illicit purposes.
Definitely.
Gotta be more careful.
Absolutely. And, I think that this is a prime example of why it's so important to really try and wrap our heads around this. The nuances of this, sanctions evasion, and especially with something as complicated as cryptocurrency, it's really crucial.
Yeah. So the VOA program also highlighted a bunch of other developments regarding North Korea. One of them was their increased use of critical rhetoric, is what they call it.
Interesting. Yeah, and, this kind of language, you got to watch it closely. It can be a sign of things to come, like provocative actions that could further increase tensions in the region.
Mm-hmm. But they're also laying out specific conditions for dialogue.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a classic tactic. A lot of times, that's used to try and extract concessions or to try and, just maintain a position of strength by kind of appearing open to negotiations, but at the same time ratcheting up the tension. They can try to sort of manipulate the situation to their advantage. It's like a real delicate geopolitical balancing act.
Yeah, it's like they're playing both sides of the field at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have NATO coming in, and the VOA program, they mentioned that NATO has reaffirmed that they want the complete denuclearization of North Korea, and they've kind of dismissed any of their criticisms.
Yeah, and I think that shows how strong the international community feels about this, about North Korea's nuclear ambitions. It sends a clear message that they're serious about denuclearization and that North Korea can't just try and distract or deflect. They're not going to tolerate that.
So on the one hand, you have this big push for denuclearization, but then at the same time, the report also mentioned that North Korea just bought a used ship from China, and it's the first purchase of its kind this year.
Huh. Well, that could be a sign that they're, trying to get around those sanctions by getting assets through, less traditional channels. It's just another reminder that they're constantly adapting, finding new ways to dodge the restrictions that are placed on them.
It's like they're always thinking a few steps ahead, like a chess game.
It really is. It's such a dynamic situation that requires careful observation and analysis. And that's why I think these deep dives are so important. We really need to understand the tactics that are being used, especially when it comes to cryptocurrency. that adds a whole new layer of complexity to the issue.
Yeah, for sure. It really feels like we're witnessing this new era of international crime fighting where the battleground is online and the stakes are incredibly high.
Absolutely. All of those traditional methods of tracking financial flows and enforcing sanctions, they're being challenged. The very nature of cryptocurrencies, with their anonymity and their decentralized structure, it requires new approaches, new technology, and a deeper understanding of how these systems actually work.
So with all of that in mind, how does all of this affect the average person?
Well, that's a great question, and that's actually what we're going to be getting into as we continue this deep dive.
So stay tuned. Okay, so we've been talking about North Korea and sanctions and cryptocurrency, pretty complex stuff. But I guess the question a lot of people might have is, how does this actually affect the average person? Like you and me.
Well, if you think back to that case of the American woman who got caught up in the whole IT worker scheme, it really highlights how easy it can be to kind of get caught up in these activities without realizing it.
Yeah.
You might just be going about your daily life, doing your job, and all of a sudden you're tangled up in a web of international sanctions evasion.
Yeah, that's pretty unsettling, honestly.
It is. It really is. And I think it really underscores the need for, more cybersecurity awareness these days. You really have to be careful, who you're doing business with online and where you're sending your money, what websites you're visiting. Those are kind of basic precautions, but they're even more important now, I think, in the age of cryptocurrency, because those transactions they could be much harder to track.
So it's not just about governments and law enforcement going after the bad guys. It's also about us, everyday people taking steps to protect ourselves.
Exactly. I mean, we all have a role to play in this, in safeguarding the integrity of the financial system, preventing that flow of money to people who are doing illegal activities. And that's why it's so crucial, understanding this whole world of sanctions and cryptocurrency. It's not just about geopolitics. It really touches our daily lives.
Yeah, it's like we're all part of this big global game of cat and mouse now, whether we like it or not.
In a way, yeah. And that actually brings us to another important aspect of all of this, the need for greater international cooperation. If you think about it, cryptocurrencies, they operate across borders, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these sanctioned entities, a lot of times they're operating in multiple countries. So to really tackle these threats effectively, you need a coordinated global response.
So it's not just about the FBI or any one agency for that matter. It's about governments and law enforcement agencies all over the world working together, sharing information, coming up with new strategies.
Exactly. It's about closing those loopholes, the loopholes that allow this sanctions evasion to flourish. And to do that, you need collaboration, you need innovation, you need a willingness to adapt to this really rapidly changing landscape.
I have to say, doing these deep dives really makes me think about things differently. It's clear that this whole world of sanctions and cryptocurrency, it's way more interconnected and complex than I think most people realize.
It really is. And, that's the whole point, isn't it? To really dig in, to uncover those hidden connections, to better understand how these seemingly, separate elements are actually all intertwined. It's about connecting the dots.
It's like we're peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer reveals something new and kind of unexpected.
I love that analogy. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I think in this case, what we're uncovering is a world where technology and geopolitics they're really colliding. And all those traditional notions of finance and security are being challenged. It's a fascinating and often unsettling landscape, but it's one that we can't afford to ignore.
For sure, for sure. But there's one thing I'm still kind of grappling with. If cryptocurrency makes it harder to enforce sanctions, does that mean that sanctions are actually becoming less effective? Like, are we fighting a losing battle here?
That's a great question, and it's one that a lot of experts are debating right now. The truth is, sanctions they've always been a complex tool, an imperfect tool, but that doesn't mean they're obsolete.
So how do they adapt? How do they stay relevant in this new world, this new world of digital currencies and decentralized finance?
That's the million-dollar question. And honestly, policymakers and law enforcement, they're scrambling to try to find that answer. They're exploring all these new approaches, developing new technologies, trying to find ways to boost that international cooperation that we were just talking about. But there are some big challenges, and it's definitely an ongoing process.
Yeah. It sounds like we're at a real turning point, where we have to rethink how we approach international security and financial regulations.
I think you're right. And the outcome of all of this, how we adapt, how we respond, it's going to have huge implications for the future of global finance and security.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here, but I think there's still one big question looming out there. What does the future hold? I mean, what can we expect to see as this landscape of sanctions and cryptocurrency keeps evolving?
That's the question that's on everyone's mind. It's hard to predict with certainty what's going to happen. But I think there are, we can look for certain trends, certain developments that might give us some clues.
So we've been talking about how North Korea is, well, they're using cryptocurrency to try and dodge sanctions, right? And all the challenges that this creates for law enforcement and what it means for, everyday people like us. So what's next? What trends should we be looking out for as this whole situation develops?
Well, I think one of the key trends to watch is the development of, better tools for tracking and tracing those cryptocurrency transactions.
Mm-hmm.
Law enforcement, they're investing a ton in this area because they realize they have to level the playing field. And they're also working on new legal frameworks and international agreements to try and deal with the specific challenges that cryptocurrencies pose.
So it's like they're trying to catch up to the criminals that are already taking advantage of all this technology, right?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, that's a fair assessment. But it's not just about playing catch-up either.
Right.
It's also about anticipating what's coming next. I mean, you have to remember that cryptocurrency it's constantly innovating, right?
Right.
There are new currencies popping up all the time, new technologies being developed, and the whole thing is in constant flux.
So it's not just reacting to the current threats, it's trying to figure out what's coming down the road.
Exactly. And that's why I think that collaboration is so important between governments and law enforcement agencies and the private sector, especially those involved in the cryptocurrency industry.
Yeah.
They have to share information and expertise and even resources if they want to stay ahead of the curve.
It sounds like a huge task, but it's obviously incredibly important.
Oh, absolutely.
But okay, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and bring it back to the listener. Knowing all of this, what can you do to protect yourself? What are some practical steps that you can take to avoid getting caught up in any of this?
That's a great question. I think first and foremost, just be vigilant, Do your research before you get involved with any cryptocurrency platforms or investments.
Right.
Make sure you really understand the risks and the security measures that they have in place, and be wary of anything that seems like an unsolicited offer. Or if they're promising you, you're going to get rich quick. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Like that old saying, right? If you're not paying for the product, you are the product.
Exactly. And in the world of cryptocurrency, the price you pay might just be, your financial security.
Oof.
Yeah. And another important thing is to protect your digital identity.
Mm-hmm.
Use strong passwords. Turn on that two-factor authentication. And be careful about what you're sharing online. Even details that seem harmless. Criminals can use that stuff to figure out who you are and target you.
It's like we all have to become our own cybersecurity experts now, huh?
In a way, yeah. I mean, the more you know about the risks and how to mitigate those risks, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this whole thing safely.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. We've explored everything from international politics to sanctions, cryptocurrency, personal security. It's a lot to process, but I think it's really crucial information for anyone, honestly, especially in this world that's becoming so interconnected.
I totally agree. And I think the biggest takeaway here is that we're all in this together. Governments, law enforcement, the private sector, and individuals, we all have a role to play in fighting these threats and in making sure that we have a more secure and stable future.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Given, how fast technology is moving and how the tactics of those who are, trying to take advantage of the system, those are constantly evolving too. What new challenges do you think we'll face in the next few years? How's this game of cat and mouse, between law enforcement and criminals? How is that going to continue to play out? These are all really important questions to think about as we move forward in this new digital age. Thanks for joining us on this journey, everybody.